Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today for a Week 16 semifinals preview. None other than John Paulson. Paulson, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. As we speak, I'm updating rankings to put Nico Collins in. Looks like he's going to play, and Michael Pittman looks like he's going to play. So just stop trimming my beard. Just going to keep growing it out for the rest of the season and updating rankings for everyone.
Like last week, it's just one of those weeks where all the lineup decisions are basically going to come down to the last 12 hours, if not sooner. It's going to come down to injury reports and just something you have to stay on top of. I think I was constantly swapping players back and forth based on injury reports last week, and we just won't know until we know. So we'll go through the show the best we can, but we're waiting on so many different situations. And we begin tonight with the Saints and the Rams, the first night of somehow 4 nights of football. And the Rams, at least we know, are an entirely different offense whenever Matthew Stafford is not under pressure. Stafford has completed 70% of his passes at 10th in yards per attempt from a clean pocket. And the last 4 games out of their bye, the Saints defense has practically allowed you to do whatever you want. And that includes getting pressure at the 24th highest rate in the league. So Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Stafford, Kyren Williams, I would imagine it's all systems go here.
Yeah, Stafford's on a heater. He's had 4 really good games, 2 of them against the Ravens and the Browns, 2 really good defenses. A little bit disappointing in his numbers against the Commanders last week, but he still had 18 fantasy points. Just didn't have to do maybe as much as he had to do in those other games. But yeah, he's a nice play tonight at home against New Orleans. They're 18th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, and you like Kyren Williams. You like both of the receivers. You could even roll Tyler Higbee out there, but he's more of a low end tight end too.
With Chris Olave back in the mix, reportedly, how are you ranking him in this game?
Yeah, I'm looking at his projection, and I've got him at 12 right now. I think he initially came in. I just gave him his season-long distributions, and he came in at about 22. But then I went back and looked at his numbers without Michael Thomas in the lineup, and his shares went up across the board. So I kind of applied those and then discounted him a little bit for the ankle injury. We do see a bit of I think it's like about a 15% drop in first game back for players that miss a game with an ankle injury. So he's at 12, and I think he's, pretty confident low end wide receiver 1. The Rams are 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So he's got a good matchup.
And for Taysom Hill, I know people have questions, but I honestly can't project. I have no idea why he only played a few snaps last week. I still want to start him wherever I can based on who is available on the waiver wire. I still think he's a top 7, top 8 tight end. So I'm going to have no issue starting him, but does he reach his floor again? Does he provide nothing? Maybe. I genuinely don't know, but I do still want to play him over the guys on the waiver wire, like a Tucker Kraft in a terrible matchup, Cade Otton, Gerald Everett, the list goes on.
Yeah, there's a difference there between what you said, though, top 7 or 8 or 6 or 7, and those guys that you mentioned, because I think I would start Isaiah Likely, Cole Kmet, Jake Ferguson, those types of guys. I probably would even start. I think you get to where it's like Goddard, Waller, Kincaid, and you're a little bit maybe concerned about their usage or health, and then you start making that. That's where it kind of got tough with me with ranking Hill, because he came back from the 2 injuries, barely was even involved, but his usage is so up and down. He could win you a week, but he could also get 2 touches like he did last week, and that was tough to swallow.
I'm definitely starting him over that group you mentioned, Kincaid, Waller, Goddard, for sure, just because they can also have the same floor as Taysom, and Taysom has a higher ceiling. So absolutely playing him over those. But again, not sure what to expect. I just know how volatile the position is. Bengals at Steelers on Saturday night. And let's start with the Bengals side of the ball, because Jake Browning did keep getting away with it. 184 yards and 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter on, as the Vikings were containing him through 3 quarters. But now in this game, no Jamar Chase and a lowly 38-point total. We saw 4 starts last year without Chase. T. Higgins averaged a 26.4% target share and 90 receiving yards per game. So if you somehow are in the semifinals with T. Higgins, now finally you could start him with confidence.
Yeah, T. Higgins bumps way up. I put him in as a sneaky start, even though he's not that sneaky, just because his ranking changed so much week to week now with the Jamar Chase injury. I wanted to definitely highlight, his startability this week. He's at 18, which is probably where he would have been if he had had a normal season. Joe Burrow, healthy, Jamar Chase healthy. T. Higgins was probably, in that 15 to 20 range on most draft boards. So he's back in that range now. I think it's a kind of a tough matchup with Joey Porter, shadow coverage, but he should see enough volume with Chase out. And as for Browning, I listed him in sneaky starts as well. I'm not as confident this week without his top weapon there, but he still has a decent receiving crew, and he should be okay against the Steelers. They're not that vaunted of a defense at this point in the season.
How are you ranking Joe Mixon in this matchup? Because we've now seen the last 3 games, Mixon's share of backfield touches has been 3 consecutive performances of season low marks. And Chase Brown, even in leaving for a handful of possessions last week, still handled a season high share, 40% of the team's backfield touches. So it seems like Brown is cutting into enough to make Mixon a very low end RB2. He needs a touchdown to get there, and he did happen to score one last week.
Yeah, just the 13 touches against Minnesota. We talked about Minnesota, and that that's a better defense than people are realizing at this point. And he still got there with the touchdown. You're looking at his 2 previous games, 24 touches, 25 touches. So maybe we're worried about the low touch count a little bit too much. His snap share didn't drop a whole lot. Maybe it was more of a matchup with the Vikings. So I have him ranked as a mid-range RB2. He's Mixon's one of those guys that if he's getting every single touch, he tends to land in a low RB1 range. And if he's not, which is the case right now with Chase Brown sort of nipping at his heels, he's in those RB2 ranks.
On the other side of the ball, wherever you need to start Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren, I do think it's a great spot, as most running backs who have dealt with issues then play the Bengals and have their way against them. Not only do I think they're going to lean into the running game with Mason Rudolph under center this week, but also the Bengals have allowed 5.5 yards per carry without DJ Reader on the field, arguably the best run stuffing nose tackle in the NFL. So Warren, Najee, wherever you need it, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, you're looking at the Bengals year to date, 5th most rushing yards allowed, 4.7 yards per carry, and that's even without the injury that you mentioned.
And for their wide receivers, since George Pickens has no issue in playing professional football, we are only on Deontay Johnson. 3 touchdowns in a row now, but also the only one getting any kind of respectable target share.
Yeah, Pickens is ranked as a wide receiver 4 if you have to start him. But then there's some other guys down there that I think I had him looking at him today. I'm like, would I really start Pickens over Rashid Shaheed or Odell Beckham? I don't know. So Deontay for sure. Cincinnati's 25th in just fantasy points allowed to receivers. I have him ranked as a low end wide receiver 2. I think he'd get plenty of work from Mason Rudolph.
Bills at the Chargers. I don't know who's going to watch this the night before Christmas Eve, but the Bills should have no issues moving the ball through the air this time around, which I think was the game plan initially against Dallas. But then whenever James Cook is just averaging over 6 yards per carry, who cares about the initial game plan? That's why the Bills instead recorded the highest run play rate of any offense in week 15. But against the Chargers that are 22nd in pressure rate, 30th in yards per attempt, 31st in explosive pass rate, it seems like one where we just start everyone, Gabe Davis included, who has a 0 in 3 of his last 4 games.
I don't think Gabe Davis at this point is a must start, but he certainly has some appeal. Yeah, has some. You don't feel like you have to get the Bills in your lineup, all the Bills in your lineup. Certainly James Cook. I think it's 5 straight games now with 100 or more total yards, and last week with the 2 touchdowns, another touchdown in week 14, another touchdown in week 11. He's really delivering, and I've got him at RB3 this week against this Chargers team that basically laid down against the Raiders. And I think, Stephon Diggs has had kind of a quiet year by his standards. He could have, a loud game here, a big game against the Chargers if the Bills decide to throw the ball at all. I do kind of draw the line a little bit at Gabe Davis in that he just hasn't been consistent, but it is such a good matchup that he could have a good game. It just, you wonder how much the Bills are really going to be pushed to throw the ball in this one.
Speaking of that, no Keenan Allen practice on Wednesday. Unclear if he's going to play at all. And it wasn't like Josh Palmer did anything promising. Like, he scored a 70-yard touchdown because of a coverage breakdown by the Raiders whenever they were up by 49 points. Other than that, Palmer, just a 12.5% target share. So I think given the points the Bills are going to pace the Chargers with, you could definitely play Palmer just for volume and opportunity through the air and negative game script. But still a little less confidence for me in Palmer.
Yeah, I've got him at 34, and that's where your things are getting dicey, where you're just like, I hope this kind of pays off. And we saw it last week, as you mentioned. He had a goose egg at halftime. I had him in my sneaky starts column, and I was feeling a little, iffy about it. And he came out and had a good second half, but it was all driven by that long touchdown. But as you mentioned, they just don't have a whole lot of weapons right now. I mean, Eckler's not doing as well as we were expecting him to. Keenan Allen's hurt. Mike Williams is hurt. Quentin Johnston isn't doing what they were maybe hoping he would do as a first-round pick. So Palmer is like the best bet in the passing game. You could also roll Gerald Everett out there. He's likely to see 4 or 5 catches. Maybe he scores a touchdown for you. Buffalo is 24th in just fantasy points allowed to tight ends.
For the Seahawks at the Titans, everyone traded for or was waiting on Derrick Henry for the supposedly easy schedule in the fantasy playoffs, and they were awarded with single-digit yards. How are you handling Derrick Henry in this matchup against Seattle?
Well, he had a really good run there, and Houston, I think, turned out to be a better rush defense than we were expecting. We saw their adjusted fantasy points allowed ranking against running backs creep up as the last few weeks, and really came to fruition against Henry. I think he's got a pretty good matchup though against Seattle. They're 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back, so this is a better matchup than Houston at this point in the season. And he's still going to see. I mean, he still saw almost all the work. It was his line was amazing because they just kept going to him even though he couldn't gain any yards. But I think he'll have a bounce back game against Seattle. They're 28th, as I mentioned, against running backs, and they've got Ryan Tannehill in it. Quarterback now, so I don't know how much they're going to want to throw the ball. I don't know if it's going to change a whole lot from Will Levis, but I mean, it's good that they can at least call upon a veteran to run the offense.
If Geno Smith is back under center as well, someone I have complete confidence in starting against this Titans secondary. Even Noah Brown last week got there with 87 and a touchdown, I believe, 32% target share. So DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, also players you can start. Metcalf in particular should have an amazing game here.
Yeah, I think you could run Geno out there. It looks like he's going to play for sure. There was a lot of drama last week, but it looks like he's going to play for sure this week.
And Charbonnet took a back seat, unlike what we saw 2 weeks ago, to Kenneth Walker. So it does not seem like a situation where you probably weren't starting Charbonnet anywhere anyhow, but Walker continues to be the one to have whatever amount of confidence we can have against the Titans front seven, who is still stuffing the run. Colts and the Falcons, an indoor environment, Taylor Heineke under center. And at least what we know is that in 3 appearances earlier this year, whenever he was on the field with Drake London only had a 14.6% target share compared to 24% from Desmond Ridder. But in those 3 games he played, all 3 went over their total. And again, it's a Colts offense who provides so much volume and play calling anyhow that we at least think it's going to be a somewhat good environment for the Colts offense as well.
This is an interesting game. I don't really like watching Atlanta play, but the Colts are always involved in these kind of wild games, and they seem to be good fantasy environments. So I am somewhat bullish about Drake London. I have him ranked as a high-end wide receiver 3. I think Kyle Pitts is playable. with Heineke at quarterback. I don't know how you feel about this, but I do think that Heineke is an upgrade over Desmond Ridder as a pure passer. So I think the passing environment's better for Pittman and for Pitts. I'm sorry, London and for Pitts.
London was getting it done consistently with Desmond Ridder, so I don't know if it's necessarily better. Also, Heineke had completed a career low 55% of his passes in those 3 games. You're still probably starting London as a wide receiver 3. That's what I kind of back him up to, because he was closer to a wide receiver 2 for me from Ridder. But again, indoors, at least as a Colts defense that has struggled, sure, we're still playing London. What are you doing with Bijan Robinson, since there's really no rhyme or reason to his usage?
Well, I think, last week he fumbled and just, Arthur Smith decided I'm going to punish him, and to his own detriment, they ended up losing the game. So, I think it's probably a fresh start for him. I have him ranked at 7. The Colts are 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. You don't have to start him, but, you probably should against the Colts, and given his talent, he probably gets about, if he doesn't fumble right away, he probably has a bounce back game.
And as you mentioned at the top of the show, Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, both at practice Thursday. The reports were Taylor's practice was going to come down to the decision to play him or not. So I would think that Taylor plays in this game without Zach Moss. And if that's the case, you are obviously starting Jonathan Taylor everywhere you have him.
I've got him in the top 5. Atlanta's middle of the road against running backs. I do think you're going to see a big workload for Jonathan Taylor. Maybe Mike Goodson just sprinkles in for some, and Trey Sermon. I mean, I was having a tough time ranking those 2 if Taylor was going to be out. So I'm actually happy that Taylor is going to play, because it makes it a lot clearer as to what's happening there. And as for Pittman, guys coming back from concussion, receivers anyway, have seen about a 30% dip in their fantasy production their first week back. So he's a little bit, normally we've been ranking him in the top 12. So I'm a little bit concerned about Pittman. Not terribly concerned, but a little bit concerned about him in terms of, his upside coming off his concussion.
Browns and Texans, no CJ Stroud. Sounds like Nico Collins is going to come back. I wish Stroud was in, if only because it'd be an amazing environment for Joe Flacco in the passing game. Flacco now averaging 44 attempts in his 3 starts for Cleveland, and the Texans secondary has fallen apart completely. Since week 10, 8.2 yards per attempt, 19.2 fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So everyone asked about, who am I streaming this week? Who can I pick up off the waiver wire? Joe Flacco is far and away my favorite quarterback on the waiver wire this week, because it's such an elite matchup.
Yeah, he's a good start regardless of Stroud's availability, which looks like he will be out. If Stroud was there, could be a really fun, high-scoring game with tons and tons of passes. But as it stands, I think you're still going to see a lot of passes out of Flacco. He's 44 minimum the last 3 games. So, when I run my numbers, it sort of looks at the whole season of Cleveland, and I have to sort of redo the Browns stats based on what they've been doing with Flacco, which is a totally different thing than what they were doing with Deshaun Watson and the other quarterbacks that they had. So, in a matchup where the Texans are 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, he's my QB 15 right now, and you could probably make a case for him, over Geno Smith or over Jordan Love. As a volume-based passer. The other guy I'm interested in is Nick Mullens, but we'll talk about him in a bit.
And for the Texans, how are you ranking Nico Collins from Case Keenum against Cleveland?
Yeah, again, I'd love to see Stroud in this game, and I would be ranking Nico Collins, significantly higher, because the passing attack for the Texans would be a lot more dependable. As it stands, I've got him ranked as a wide receiver 3. The calf injury is also a little bit of an issue, 13 to 15% drop in fantasy production first week back from a calf injury. So a little concerned about that, but it might be offset by the absence of Tank Dell. Collins's volume might have a higher floor for that reason. His return does, put a damper on Noah Brown a bit, but Noah Brown should still see some work. It's just we're seeing it from Davis Mills instead of CJ Stroud, and that's a big downer.
Also a plus for Devin Singletary, who took the reins this past game. Out-touched Dameon Pierce 2 weeks ago, but then completely getting every single touch, 30 touches. Now the only running back in the league with multiple 30-touch games, and Damian Pierce, single-digit snaps, 1 touch overall. So Singletary, just based on volume alone, despite the matchup, everyone should be starting as a top 24 back.
Yeah, I think you have to. It's really schizophrenic how they're doing this backfield though. Like, are we 100% sure it's going to be Singletary in every down roll? So I was afraid to give him, every single touch or 99% of the touches or 95% of the touches, because then, Singletary is in the top 10. That worries me a little bit, but just given on what they did last game, that's what we can expect. And I think he's a strong start. It just might backfire if they continue to go back and forth between him and Pierce.
Packers and Panthers. And we have seen Jordan Love, after that month stretch of easy games, sort of come back to earth these past 2 weeks. Not only that, but the Packers offense also banged up. So we are touch and go with Jayden Reed. No idea if he's going to play. If he doesn't, I know you wrote up Dontayvion Wicks as a sneaky start.
And Romeo Dobbs, I think they're both going to play tons of snaps in this one if Jayden Reed and Christian Watson remain out. I think part of the Love struggles, not only they played the Lions, and then I'm blanking on their other win, the Chiefs, and then lost to two subpar teams, one at home against I guess the Bucks are okay. Some of that is has to do with losing Christian Watson, who was coming on really strong prior to his injury. They did get Aaron Jones back last week, and he saw a significant amount of the work. I think he's got the best matchup of the entire Packer offense against the Carolina rush defense, which is 25th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. But certainly in the passing game, I think it's mainly 3 guys. It's going to be Wicks, Dobbs, and Tucker Kraft, along with Jones catching some passes. But those are the 3 guys that are startable. I don't know how great I feel about any of them, because Carolina, really hasn't given up a lot of passing production to opposing offenses. And so, I think Jordan Love's even a little bit dicey. I think the Packers might score most of their fantasy points through the running game.
There's going to be so little volume in this game. It's going to be a struggle for anyone to get there, except for Chuba Hubbard, who now at least 22 carries in 3 consecutive games, 24 touches without Frank Reich. And it's actually an amazing spot. Since the last month, the Packers are one of only 2 defenses allowing over 5 yards per carry. So Hubbard's really the only person I'm trusting here.
Certainly on the Carolina side of the ball, I wouldn't trust anyone else.
But yes, Packers receivers, literally touch and go. Confidence in Jayden Reed. And then Wicks for me if Reed is out. But as you said, the passing game is not something I want to be targeting right now, especially in this low volume matchup for the Packers. Commanders and the Jets. I dropped Terry McLaurin, and I was very confident about it. Even with Sam Howell in the game against the Rams last week, Terry McLaurin only had 3 catches for 48 yards. Over the last month, he has 0, 50, 43, and 33 receiving yards. He's not someone you can play. And then, of course, Jacoby Brissett comes off the bench, and McLaurin stacks 93 yards and a touchdown. But in this game, with Howell back under center, I, again, do not think Terry McLaurin, you can use him whatsoever. And same for Howell, because like we talked about with Josh Dobbs a couple weeks ago, the leash has got to be shorter than ever for Howell. So it doesn't seem like you're going to get 4 quarters of starting.
Yeah, the Jets are first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks and to receivers. So this is, the worst possible matchup. You're trying to avoid playing these. The thing they have going for them is that Howell's a starter in a very pass-heavy passing attack. But the fact that he got yanked last week is a sign that maybe he might get yanked this week. And of course, McLaurin had a good game last week, but it was largely from Jacoby Brissett. And you're looking at him as a wide receiver 3 just because, he might see 7-8 targets, but I don't know how much fantasy production he's going to be able to generate against the Jets.
And Brian Robinson still isn't practicing, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, and we saw a 3-headed backfield since Jonathan Williams is also involved. Chris Rodriguez had more touches than Antonio Gibson. So a situation you can definitely stay away from altogether. Curtis Samuel's the only one that I have any amount of confidence, if you even want to call that, since he does have a 25% target share the last 3 games, and the Jets are also allowing the 3rd highest target rate from the slot. For the Jets side of the ball, Trevor Siemian, presumably under center for Zach Wilson, who is suffering a concussion. How are you handling a potential Garrett Wilson bounce back in the rankings?
It's hard to know, what Simeon's going to do with, a player like Garrett Wilson, but he's been pretty consistently targeted no matter who's been the quarterback for the Jets. I've got him ranked at 20. It's a fantastic matchup against the Commanders. They're 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. They're 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So I've got Simeon at 27. So he is a, bottom of the barrel streamer for Superflex formats as well. They just don't have a whole lot going on in the passing game other than Wilson. That bodes well for him.
For the Jets running backs and Breece Hall, a down game last week with 6 touches, but potentially positive game script here for the Jets, given the offensive woes the Commanders are going through. So how are you handling Breece Hall for anyone with start decisions there?
Well, Washington's 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs too. I think the concern with Hall is, does he get as many dump offs from Simeon? I think that was where he's making a lot of his fantasy points over the last few weeks. The running game really isn't going very well, but this is a good spot for him.
Lions and Vikings. You mentioned Nick Mullens, who I also have as my second favorite streaming quarterback behind Joe Flacco this week. So go ahead and talk to us about Nick Mullens.
Yeah, I have to, in my personal league, I have to decide between Nick Mullens and Geno Smith in a 6-point pass TD league. And right now I'm leaning, and the rankings say Mullens in 6-point pass TD because of the matchup at home against Detroit. They're 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, obviously in the dome home game. I think it's a great spot for him. And he showed last week that he's competent enough to run the offense. And he's got one of the best receiving cores in the league now that Justin Jefferson is back in the fold.
Also for the Lions, it is a very tough matchup against this Vikings defense, but we've seen because of the construct of their offense, even a couple weeks ago against the Bears, the passing game didn't do anything, but both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery averaged over 6 yards per carry. I know everyone wasn't happy with Montgomery's final box score, but he still out-touched Jahmyr Gibbs 19-13. So tougher matchup for Montgomery personally, since the Vikings are allowing 8 catches per game to opposing backfields over the last month. That's all Gibbs territory, but still an environment indoors where we think there's enough elite talent on offense where both offenses can get there, thus the players can get there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, the Vikings bottom 6 in rushing yards allowed, 92, 3.7 yards per carry allowed. The other thing I wanted to mention on the other side of the ball, so I think you're absolutely starting Gibbs. I think Montgomery is probably a decision based on who your other options are.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to mention Ty Chandler because it does sound like Kevin O'Connell now is going to hand the keys to him, even if Alexander Mattison is back. And it's not clear that he's going to be back. Last I heard, he had a high ankle sprain, so it would be tough to make it back, within 2 weeks. And if he did, he'd probably be limited. And it sounds like they are going to feature Chandler anyway. So I've got him ranked in the top 10.
O'Connell used the terms absolutely and featured twice.
Featured.
Yeah, featured, which I would assume that means Ty Chandler will finally be featured in that backfield. He's also handled 32 of 35 running back carries and 37 to 40 touches since Alexander Mattison suffered his ankle injury. So no one else getting involved whatsoever. So simply as a touch-based option indoors, yes, so you're absolutely starting Ty Chandler as a low-end RB1. Also for the wide receivers, how are you handling Jordan Addison? Because it was still Justin Jefferson who commanded the volume, 31% target share. Addison only at 18.5%. But he caught his 2 touchdowns, which were a couple lucky catches, but also he's good at football, so he can do that. So I don't know how to handle Addison, honestly, in this spot.
I've got him at 24, and you just look at the guys around him. Chris Godwin, quiet year, but had a big game against my Packers last week. Deontay Johnson, we're not sure about the quarterback situation with Pittsburgh, So I think it's reasonable, those 2 guys below him, and those are the types of guys you're kind of deciding amongst. I mean, the matchup is really good against Detroit. The game is indoors. He clearly has the eye of Nick Mullens, at least when it comes to touchdowns. So, I think he's a fairly confident start. Not to the point where we were starting him every week like we were when Justin Jefferson is out, but I think he's certainly startable this week, given some of the other options at the position in that high end wide receiver 3, low end wide receiver 2 range.
Let's talk about the Jags and Bucks, because I think it is an amazing offensive environment for the fantasy playoffs, even with Trevor Lawrence in concussion protocol, because the Bucks defense has been so bad out of their bye. 30th in explosive passing rate, 31st in yards per attempt allowed to opposing quarterbacks, that Calvin Ridley, who was targeted on 45% of pass attempts without Zay Jones last week, whenever Jones left the field, that Evan Ingram, they can easily get there even from CJ Beathard. And then also elevates Baker Mayfield in the Bucks offense and a potential Godwin spot in back-to-back games, because the Jaguars run the 4th highest rate of zone coverage, and Godwin has tied Evans with a 25% target per route run rate against that scheme. Whereas against man coverage, Evans was lapping him 37% to 23%. So I do actually like Godwin quite a bit in this game. Also, the last 2 weeks, Godwin 41% target share to Evans 21%. So it seems like the tide could be turning a hair this last month.
It would be nice because it's been all Mike Evans all year for Godwin managers. They are acutely aware of that, so it's nice that he's coming out at least at the end. The Jaguars have been a pass funnel, but they are struggling a little bit against the run as the AFPA is starting to catch up to them. They're 18th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back, so Rashad White is a must start. And obviously Mike Evans has had a great year. I agree with you. I think Godwin is a solid play. I have him at 25. Mayfield is a great streamer if you need a streamer, or if you have him on your bench, he's a really good start. I disagree with you slightly on the Jaguars offense. I am a little bit more concerned about the passing attack as a whole with Beathard at quarterback. I don't know if he is capable of taking advantage of the Bucks to the degree that they would all need to get there. But there are a number of injuries here, so you do have an opportunity for Ridley and for Ingram to sort of see the bulk of the targets, because Zay Jones has been nicked up, and obviously Christian Kirk is out as well. So if the targets are more concentrated between ETN, Ridley, and Ingram, then they could certainly get there.
Ingram also targeted on 4 of Beathard's 10 pass attempts a couple weeks ago, whenever Beathard came off the bench for Lawrence. Cardinals at Bears. Cardinals are really bad, and the Bears defense is really good. Your thoughts on anyone outside of Trey McBride?
Well, I'm worried about Kyler Murray as you like him as a runner. He'll run for touchdowns. His passing hasn't been very good this year. The Bears defense, as you mentioned, has really gotten stingy. They're 3rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. McBride is the lone confident play. Obviously, Marquise Brown is likely to miss with a heel injury. So if you're really desperate, maybe you throw a Michael Wilson out there, but he hasn't shown a whole lot of rapport with Kyler Murray either. So from a trustworthy standpoint, I think it's just McBride. And, Connor will get his touches, but the Bears have a really good run defense. They're also 3rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. They've allowed the fewest rushing yards this season, 79.8, 3.5 yards per carry. So there's probably not going to be a lot of running room for him, Connor, but he might get a touchdown.
Yeah, Connor, one of those ones where if you're basically making a decision with, like David Montgomery, because you don't necessarily want to start him, but if you have to, sure. For the Bears side of the ball too, Justin Fields last week, a game plan where he was under pressure on over 50% of his dropbacks. The first time the last month he didn't record double-digit carries. But in this game against the Cardinals defense, where they didn't blitz Brock Purdy on a single dropback, and Fields is averaging over 8 yards per attempt from a clean pocket this year. So I think it's an amazing spot for Justin Fields, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, etc.
I would agree. Those are the 3, though, right? There's just you look at the backfield, and it's Rashawn Johnson came out and had the best game. So you would think, okay, maybe he'll get the start, but D'Onta Foreman continues to start. We'll see what happens this week. This is a great spot for the running game. Somebody is likely to have a good game. The Cardinals are 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So somebody is going to have a good game, I think, in this backfield. But from a trustworthy standpoint, Fields, Kmet, and DJ Moore, those are the 3 you can count on.
Yeah. as long as it's 3 players for the Bears, it is 0 players in their backfield. Cowboys at Dolphins. Excited about this one, not because I think it goes over the total. I think it's another situation where it's actually a pretty bad matchup for both teams. But I'm curious because this is going to answer a lot of the lingering questions we have about how real both offenses and defenses are. Like, even for Josh Allen and the Bills offense to get there, Allen was under pressure on 50% of his dropbacks last week. And Tua under pressure this year has been miserable. 43% completion rate, 5.7 yards per attempt, which is 22nd among all quarterbacks. And so if the Cowboys defense can still get pressure here, I do worry about Tua, not Tyreek or Waddle, but Tua overall, who I think is another start-sit decision for people. Not only that, but the Dolphins running backs. We just saw James Cook again have a career day, and in 6 full games with Achane this year, the Dolphins are leading the league with 6 yards per carry. So I think the Dolphins running backs can have success. Your thoughts on this game overall and the players who are question marks?
Yeah, we're still seeing Mostert kind of in the lead role, Achane in a complementary role. So I think they're both startable, but I would, give the lean to Mostert. I think he's the goal line back, and they are, likely, or as likely as any team probably in the league, to have multiple rushing touchdowns in a game. So he can get you 2 certain games. Tua, I have at 8, and I'm looking at the guys. I definitely would start like a Brock Purdy or Lamar Jackson over him. Jared Goff in a tough matchup indoors at Minnesota. There's some pluses and some minuses with that. Matthew Stafford, I think we discussed. I think he's a really solid start, but I don't know if I would start him over Tua if Tyreek is back. So then we get into Baker Mayfield, et cetera. So I think he is startable. He's a little bit dicey. They're 14th. The Cowboys are in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Feel pretty good about him if he has his full set of weapons. If he's down Tyreek, which I don't think he will be, I think Tyreek's going to play. Then you get a little bit worried because the Cowboys are probably more capable of taking away Jalen Waddle. I guess you look at the Jets defense and they're pretty solid. So you ended up having a nice day anyway. I think with Tua, depends on who you have on the bench. I'm just starting to think about like what are your other options. I don't think I would go down to the Joe Flacco's, Geno Smiths of the world, but certainly Stafford. That's a tough decision.
And for the Cowboys, we've seen Brandon Cooks become touchdown or bust option. Really can only play him if you think the environment goes over. I don't think that's this game, honestly. It's volatile. It could happen, but not a situation where I want to play him. You're sticking with CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson, and that's it through the air.
I would agree with that. I think Cooks is more of a, I have a wide receiver 3. I have a fourth flex spot, and I need to, plug somebody in there that's in what should be a high scoring environment. I don't know if the game goes over the total, but it should still be a high scoring environment compared to a lot of these other games that we have, and both offenses are certainly capable. So, you might see a touchdown out of him. He's a dicey wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type.
Christmas Eve, the NFL has gifted us with the Patriots and Broncos to put our children to sleep peacefully in the evening. The only player I would be interested in is either Hunter Henry or Mike Gesicki. Hunter Henry battling a knee injury, hasn't practiced as of Thursday. And we saw not only all year had the Broncos allowed the most points per game to opposing tight ends, but then we saw Sam Laporta just mount them for 3 touchdowns as well. So that trend continues for one of the Patriots tight ends. Other than that, though, I guess if you want to start Demario Douglas, whatever, little possession receiver who doesn't have a ceiling. Any other thoughts here?
You're just talking pass catchers, right? Because I think Ezekiel Elliott is certainly okay. He's certainly startable. He's got a nice matchup against the Broncos. They're pretty bad against the run. 17th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. Even though he had a bad game last week in 16 touches, he wasn't very productive. I think he'll bounce back and have a good week this week. Especially
if Ramondre's out, which it does seem like he's going to be out again. On the Broncos side of the ball, also, where do you have Courtland Sutton ranked? Since that's pretty much where we're down to him and Javonte Williams, who isn't providing a ceiling either.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Sutton, I have at 23. The Patriots, probably their weakest spot is against receivers, the 23rd, 22nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the receiver position. Obviously, there's not much going on at tight end there. You can't start Jerry Jeudy, even though he had a decent game last week. against the Lions. Javonte Williams, it's a tough matchup. Plus, with 32 teams playing, he's just down in those rankings at 27. The Patriots are 4th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think, Russell Wilson's sort of startable, but I wouldn't feel great about it. He's at 18.
Monday, Christmas Day, 3 games. Let's start with the Raiders and the Chiefs because we finally got what we've all been clamoring for the last 2 years, and that's an every down receiver with Patrick Mahomes. As Rashee Rice now, the last 2 weeks, 83% route rate in this past game, a season high 93% route rate. I would consider Rice for the rest of the year closer to a low-end wide receiver 1, fringe wide receiver 1, given that the target share is definitely coming with the opportunity now.
Completely agree. I have him at 13 this week, wide receiver 13. Vegas is 18th in just fantasy points allowed to receivers. I have been ranking him in that 15 to sort of 22 range because of the snaps. The snaps weren't there, but over the last 2 weeks, as you mentioned, he's playing starter snaps and virtually an every down player, and we actually have it. So since Tyreek Hill, we haven't really had it, but now I think he's a rock solid option, and it's nice to have that. I mean, owners or managers who drafted him probably drafted him very late, and now they're able to lock him in to their fantasy lineups for the fantasy playoffs.
Both running backs were in waiting on, but it sounds like both Isiah Pacheco and Josh Jacobs will play. And if that's the case, just remember that both were every down running backs prior to their injuries. Do you think they'll both return as such in this game?
I do. I'm a little low on Jacobs just because I think the matchup against the Chiefs and the game environment against the Chiefs might work against him. Whereas with Pacheco, I think he's in a great game environment. The matchup is great against Vegas, 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. But right now I've got Jacobs ranked as a low end RB2, just given the spread and just what we're expecting how this game to play out. If they stay competitive, then he's going to probably do better than that and be a big part of why they stay competitive. But I'm not super bullish on Josh Jacobs this week.
And Jacoby Myers is someone also I am not bullish on. Seems like we really got away with one since he added points with a thrown touchdown to Davante Adams.
Yeah, Davante himself is not ranked as high as I would normally like to rank him. I have him at 17. It's a tough matchup with the Chiefs secondary, but he could see and should see a lot of volume in this one.
Giants at Eagles. Jalen Hurts battling the flu this last game, battling a knee injury all year, but still posted 2 rushing touchdowns, got there with over 60 rushing yards. Any thoughts for the Eagles passing game here that it's probably honestly just going to drown out the Giants offense entirely?
I think you're fine with Jalen Hurts. He's my number 1 quarterback. You starting him if you have him. After that, AJ Brown is rock solid. We've seen Devonta Smith's numbers take a dip with a healthy Dallas Goedert, even though Goddard's not doing a whole lot. DeAndre Swift is sort of a low-end RB2, high-end RB3 for me, just because of the touchdown equity that Hurts brings to the table. We don't see a whole lot of touchdowns for Swift, even though he does get his yards. So that's where I'm sort of at with this. You're definitely starting Brown. You can start Devonta Smith. You can start Goddard. But in this game, how many points are the Giants really going to put up? Are the Eagles going to be pushed at all in this one, or is it going to be like a 21-3 type game?
It's even worse that their trenches are falling apart too. Like last week, Tommy DeVito under pressure on 47% of his drop back, suffered a concussion in game. He was sacked 7 times as well. So it's not a great spot for even Saquon Barkley, who you have to start based on the touches, but the game script again, it's probably just going to take him out of it like last week, and you see 5 to 8 points, and that's it.
Are they expecting DeVito to play or not play with the?
He returned in the 4th quarter of that game. So
he did. Okay.
Yeah, but Dable came out afterwards and said they're evaluating everything, which usually means Tyrod Taylor also may start this one. Probably not anything we'll know until Sunday or Monday, though.
I think given the nature of the position, Darren Waller is interesting at tight end. He was a part-time player last week. I would expect those snaps to ramp up this week. And it's the Eagles are a pass funnel, and so he could see a big 6 for 60 with a touchdown type of a day. Just given the nature of the tight end position, that people are scrambling to fill up their rosters. But I don't think any other receivers are too appealing this week against the Eagles.
And finally, the nightcap that I will peel myself away from the family for, the Ravens, the Niners, a potential Super Bowl preview. And I know people have questions about the offensive skill players based on the defenses in this game, but it's so volatile because the offenses are so good as well that maybe the defenses don't even matter. And that includes like options like Isaiah Likely, because even the Niners, week 11, Kate Otten went for 49 yards against them. The Seahawks totaled over 56 yards in back-to-back games. And then last week, Trey McBride reached 100. Even Elijah Higgins reached 44 yards. So I think Likely is in a great spot from Lamar Jackson. And yeah, I'm just trying to get everyone, Brandon Ayuk included, just in this game.
I think you can have confidence in all the offensive players for the most part. I mean, I guess the Baltimore receivers are a little dicey with Zay Flowers starting him, but maybe not as confident as he did earlier in the year. Beckham had a quiet game last week. Is his hot run over? But I think he's a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 flex type play. I also like Likely as well. I've got him at 7. San Francisco is 13th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. They're a little bit mediocre to weak against the pass. I mean, I think they're decent against the run as well. The 49ers are, but I think this could be a really high scoring game, higher than people think, if these defenses aren't able to contain these really exciting offenses. And I think on the Baltimore side of the ball, Gus Edwards should be back in the saddle as a 15 carry back with, potential to score 1 or 2 touchdowns on top of it with the injury to Keaton Mitchell. Pretty confident about Lamar Jackson. As I mentioned, the 2 receivers, Flowers and Beckham, a little bit dicey, but startable. But you wonder how many passing yards Jackson will have if they're able to run the ball at all, because they're trying to keep the 49ers off the field, I would think.
And Gus Edwards, for me, is another one of those decision backs where it just comes down to who else is on your roster, because he did in 5 games before Keaton Mitchell entered the rotation, did average 16.5 touches, 13.5 points per game. But yes, it is the daunting 49ers front 7. So just play it based on matchups on your own roster. Other than that, Paulson, I think that's the best we could do given all the injury reports and 4 days of games that we're still waiting on everything. So what else do we have on the site for everyone this week?
I think that's pretty impressive. We got through 16 games in 48 minutes. I'm just lamenting the fact that I have to try to get rankings out on Tuesday. So I do have a lot of work to do on Monday on Christmas. This is the worst possible schedule. So listen to me whine about my job for a few seconds. One time I'll do it this year. I have a sneaky starts up, and obviously I need to spend quite a bit of time this weekend and get these week 17 rankings up for next week, because it's championship time. We're in crunch time right now.
The DFS show will be at its normal hours, Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, and the waiver wire for week 17, you're not getting it until Tuesday morning. Suck it up. So until then, Paulson, good luck to everyone in the semifinals, and we'll be back for one more round of a championship preview next week. Until then, especially over the holidays, enjoy everyone, your family, your friends, and remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.